morning. How's everyone doing? Is everyone good? Oops. That was a little louder than I had anticipated. Oops, sorry, belly. Sorry, the pants slipped a little. Just a little slip. How's it going, everyone? All feeling good? Hey, Becca. Today we are breaking into the world of peppermint mocha for coffee, and I don't want to hear anyone say that it's too early for that, because peppermint mocha flavor knows no month. The fact that it took until last year for them to even make a sugar-free peppermint mocha means that I will drink it starting as soon as they bring it out. And I don't care what month it is. It could be May as far as I'm concerned, and I would drink it. So, we're not skipping Halloween, don't worry. I just don't like the pumpkin spice flavor as much. I also get sad when it goes away, Becca. You can tell him that I agree, it is sad. I like pumpkin spice things in general. I like pumpkin things in general. The sugar-free Coffee Mate pumpkin spice creamer is not great. It's just not great, I'm not gonna lie. But here we go on our journey of peppermint mocha. I hope it's as good as it was last year. So far behind the chapter that I made today. Hello, we can catch you up, Ray. I need a little pumpkin with my pumpkin spice. Me too. And I felt like theirs was too spice, too little pumpkin this year. And I don't know if that was that way last year. I don't remember it being that way. Yeah, Megan, totally. I'm obsessed. Like, I don't want to sound like that person, but it is totally Christmas in a cup. I completely agree with you. But like I said, I would drink it in May. Like, I don't care. You know what I mean? I just don't care. I need to empty this really quickly. Triple chocolate K-cups. Oh, we have an espresso machine. You know what's weird, Megan? And this is not me saying that anyone else shouldn't do it. I just can't deal with, like, I don't do well with flavored coffee pods. I don't know what it is. It's not like, I just can't deal with, like, I don't do well with flavored coffee pods. I don't know what it is. It's not like, and usually I just, there's something about it. I guess it's, I genuinely do like coffee, so I still want the coffee flavor. Baby is growing very well. She has a doctor's appointment today. Oh my gosh, the ASMR was so good, right, Ashley? I get so mad about pumpkin spice. I'm not pumpkin, it's just the spice, people. It is just the spice. That's true. Pumpkin spice lattes are just the spice, but I do like a good pumpkin addition to it, I have to say. Like, I make like a pumpkin, yeah, and not even just the weird aftertaste, Megan. I think I genuinely still want the coffee flavor, you know what I mean? Like, I like that part of it. So, I mean, maybe, I don't know. Do you have an ultrasound today? You know, I'm not sure. I actually don't know if we have an ultrasound today. It gets a little bit confusing if I'm being honest with you. Today is our monthly checkup with our regular OB, but we did our scan at maternal fetal medicine about a week and a half ago, and then they sent that report over. This smells so good. This is like an Andes mint in a cup. This smells so good. I'm sorry, I got distracted. It smells so good in here right now. Yeah, I don't know. So like, here's the thing. I thought that, so last time we went to maternal fetal medicine, which is where I go for the scans because our doctor likes to use her because of our age, or because of my age rather. We went a week later to see our doctor for like the report or whatever, and our doctor still did like a really quick scan. So I don't know if she'll do that again today. I genuinely have no idea. This smells so good. I will tell you, the maternal fetal medicine doctor is, I think I've mentioned this to you all before. She's so thorough and so lovely, but she is very just by the book, which is great, but she's not interested in like getting the best photo of the baby and printing that out. She'll just click print on like what the heck ever. Like, hold on, I want to show you the last photo that she printed for us so you guys can laugh, because I was like, why bother? Like, why did you even print this? Someone tell me what is what is this supposed to do for me? Like, I'm sorry, but this is scary and sad, and I don't want it. And I know it's because their eyes are fused shut and it's like weird and it's a face on. I know. But this was not the one to choose to print. Like, what are we doing here, friends? I don't know. Right, Sloth? That was exactly what I said. And I was like, man, that's a little creepy. And Secret Husband was like, don't call our baby creepy. I was like, I wasn't calling our baby creepy. I was calling this picture creepy. Also, have you met the children in my family? We do end up a little creepy. Like, they're really nice, kind of creepy. So I found like a fan art thing the other day. It like came across my Facebook or whatever. It's like, look, I'm not a fan of AI, but I love fan art. So like when people draw like mashups of characters, I'm obsessed, right? And so the other day, I saw someone had drawn, and it's not the first time, this happens all the time, probably because of their hair color, but someone had drawn a mashup of Sally and Ariel. I know, right? It is a little sad. So Sally and Ariel as a matchup is like, that's pretty great, right? You know what I mean? Like Ariel in a Sally costume. It's about as good as it gets for some of us, right? And so I sent it to my sister, and my sister, whose daughter is basically Sally Ariel, responded with, no, don't show this to her. And I said, why can't I show my niece this perfect picture for her? And she said, I am at capacity with Sally. I can't take it anymore. Please don't show this to her. Also, Zoe has not taken her mermaid tail off for 3 days, so it means I have to carry her from room to room because she can't walk. And I was like, oh. So my 4-year-old niece, who now has a mermaid tail, has decided she's a mermaid, but because she lives on land, that's a problem. So she just sits on the chair and waits for someone to come get her, much like Ariel in the parade at Disneyland. So my sister was like, if you show her Ariel dressed up as Sally, I will never escape this. And I was like, I guess that's true, but I really want to support her interests. And she was like, that's fine, another day. I was like, okay. Morning, Amanda. It was very funny. Very funny. I'm going to send this to Grayson really quickly because I know that they do not want to miss today. They caught up just to watch today with us because, where are they? There they are. Because they're like all about this book, which is so fun. So anyway, that did happen. So I almost want to show you guys like, we don't show her face, but like if I block out her face with like a Sally mask or something, I want to show you a picture of her dressed as this mermaid because she's in a full mermaid costume, you guys, and feeding her baby brother seaweed as she goes. She's convinced she's a mermaid, and honestly, I'm not gonna argue that with her. Like, I'm not gonna be the one that tells her she's not a mermaid. Aunt Sasha's not gonna tell you no. Absolutely not. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, I'm not gonna be the one that crushes that dream. No. Last night, Secret Husband and I were talking about how Zoe hyperfixates on Sally and how I wasn't gonna break that because I was a hyperfixating child as well. And he said, what did you... This is hilarious. Hey, Grayson. And he said to me, he said, well, what was your hyperfixation as a child? And I said, babe, it was Ariel. And he said, honey, that wasn't your hyperfixation as a child. That's still your hyperfixation. And I was like, no, I know, which is why I can't break her spirit because I don't have any room to talk. This was our just before bed conversation. He was like, that didn't end, sweetheart. And I was like, it didn't, you're right. You think you're Belle? Yeah. Well, you know, my sister was Belle and I was Ariel. So my sister, you guys, unfortunately I went to Pearl Harbor as a child. Oh, but I like that actually. I like that. That sounds good to me, Meg. I'm into it. I don't know if I've told you guys this, but when this, I'm gonna give you some insight into the conundrum that was growing up with my mother, because you guys have heard some of the weird stories of like being my mother's child, and some of them shocked you guys and stuff like that. But I'm gonna tell you one on the other side, like the good side of being my mother's child, right? Yeah, Becca's the frazzled lady asking for 6 eggs. It's true. Hey, Brittany. So when my sister was in kindergarten, Beauty and the Beast came out. My sister decided she was Belle, and my sister only ever wanted to be dressed as Belle, okay? She only ever wanted to be dressed as Belle, including the basket and the book, right? So my mom let Catherine go to school for an entire month dressed as Belle with the basket and her school books in the basket. Right, I know, right? Yeah. Seriously, Catherine, like, what are you doing here? Yeah, exactly. So that is a thing that was allowed in our house. You were allowed to go to school in your princess costumes. She did that one right. She was like, you know what? Pick your battles, and I am not battling this 5-year-old on whether or not she is Belle. So let's just send her to school. Mom, letting you live your truth. That's exactly right. She's like, if you are Belle, you be Belle, honey. Whatever you want. In that same vein, there is a family photo of us from what I believe is 1996, okay? A 1996 family photo for Christmas, where we are all in Christmas clothes of varying kinds. Mom and my brother and sister's dad are in nice, normal adult Christmas clothes. My sister is in a nice Christmas dress. I was dressed in what I called an elf outfit, but it was really like a Christmas shirt with some elf leggings. Fine, whatever. I'm gonna give you 3 guesses as to what my brother was wearing, and then I'm gonna tell you, but just go ahead and guess what he was wearing for our Christmas photo, 1996. reindeer outfit, Spider-Man, Prince Charming, and Grinch outfit. No, he was Aladdin. He was Aladdin. Yeah. He was Aladdin. She couldn't get him out of the Aladdin costume for a long time, and so she just let it go. And so in our Christmas cards that year, my brother was Aladdin. So when I tell you that hyperfixating on a character runs in our family, I cannot tell Zoe no. Oh, I'll send you proof, Amanda. I'll put it in the chat. I can't be the one that tells Zoe she has to get out of her costume. I won't do it. I won't be that person. It's an obvious choice. She does. She picks her battles. My mom was like, I can't with this one. You guys want to wear your costumes? Wear your stupid costumes. Actually, she didn't think they were stupid. See, here's the thing about mom, though, is that because my mom is like in her heart always a performer, to her, wearing your costume doesn't seem that weird. Merry Christmas, Aladdin every year. Yeah, I mean, hilarious, hilarious. We also have those mall photos from Sears one year, and he's Superman in those. So, yeah. Anyway, we're gonna read now, but the moral of this story is what Amanda is saying. Pick your battles, but also, if your kid is hyperfixating on something that's not hurting anyone, maybe they're just gonna grow up to be a little weirdo. I don't know. Your daughter wears Snoopy constant for a month after Halloween. That's right. That's right, Amanda. Last year, so my sister usually lets Zoe just wear it, like for the first year and a half that she had her Sally costume, my sister just let her wear it for like whatever. But then she was being not so good about some stuff, and her punishment was that she got her Sally costume taken away. You guys, what a punishment. I mean, and Catherine said, look, we're not talking about Sally for a little while right now because you haven't been so good about, I can't even remember what it was now. This was last year. It was a full meltdown, Grayson. You don't even know. And this kid does not have meltdowns. We're reading a book called Hex Appeal, Megan. It's so good. You're going to love it. And I promise I'm going to start right now. And I know I've gotten distracted. I'm talking about the kids. But like, I have never seen a parent be so strict in my life. She packed up all the Nightmare Before Christmas stuff and put them in a box in the garage until Zoe could be a good girl. I was like, wow, I'm not sure if I would rather be hit. Like, we were hit as children and that's bad, but like taking away your hyperfixation thing, maybe I would rather just be spanked. I don't know. Yeah, it was a timeout box. It made me sad for her. I was like, well, when you get spanked, at least it's over really fast. Like, I don't know. I was like, okay. No, I don't advocate for hitting your children, and I will not hit my child. But like in my heart, I was a little like, she took away her Sally costume. I was like, so mean to my precious niece. But I'm also obsessed with Zoe, so I can't really be trusted. That's genius. I'm telling you, yeah. No, that's the thing about my sister. I have to tell you guys, my sister is a great mom, and her kids are so well adjusted. I tell her all the time, like, I look at them and I'm like, see, that's smart. Yeah, Megan, I like that one, actually. That doesn't bother. I think that's a good one, actually. I like that. Tell your fiance I support his dad and his decision. My 6-year-old dad, you don't understand my child. That's for asking how school was. All kids have their days just like adults. Of course they do, but it was like multiple days in a row, Amanda, so it was like a thing. Yeah. You know, my sister's just, she's so good with her kids. Yeah, my sister was like a break from Sally, thank God. Of course, it's always fine to have, you know, things. She has to maintain her consequences, and I don't ever argue, you know, whatever like that. You know, I always support Catherine in what she does. But from the side, I was like, Catherine, that's really, like, you're gonna take Sally away? I was like, okay. But it worked, and when she brought Sally back out last month, because they were decorating for Halloween, Zoe was so excited to see all the Sally stuff again. So there's something to be said for that as well, making it something special, you know, too. She was like, you can't, you know, only live in Sally if you're not going to be a good girl. And I was like, that's fair, I guess. But anyway, speaking of witches, of which my sister is one, of course. Right, Amanda? Well, actually, my sister and I have a deal about what Amanda's saying here. Amanda said, but I get it. When my sister punished my nieces, I always gave them treats when she wasn't looking. Oh, for seriousness, Grayson, totally. And I'm sure we'll talk about that when you're here too. But my sister and I have a deal about her kids, and it will probably go the same way with our kids, which is because we want the kids to all know that like Auntie Sasha is like a safe space to go talk about things when you're mad at your parents. We have a system where I know what they're allowed to have, and we sneak treats, even though my sister knows I'm giving them to her, so that we created that bond where we're doing something that's just for us. So Zoe thinks like, oh, we're gonna go get a piece of candy. It's just me and Aunt Sasha. It's very exciting. But Catherine knows about it, right? So like, we're not really sneaking around her parents, but like in her little baby mind, she's like, oh, Aunt Sasha does special things just for me. Nobody knows about it. So that the hope is that when she's older, if she's like mad at her parents or like wants to run somewhere, she doesn't run to a stranger or anything like that. She calls me. You know what I mean? Like, that's the idea, is like, I'll keep your secrets for you. You know what I mean? Like, that she like knows that I'm a safe place to call. So we've been trying to like instill in her that like, I will keep your secrets for you. Don't worry, I won't tell, you know, that kind of thing. My favorite is to love the sugar. Grayson, don't you be doing that to ours. But Grayson's nieces on her other side of the family are actually the cutest little things you ever did see. I met them at Mabel and Grayson's wedding, and they are so stinking cute. They're just precious, and they're these pint size of, not yours, no, I know, yeah. Well, mine's gonna be your niece soon, so I mean, she technically already is, but she's not, you know, able to be given anything yet. But anyway, let's read anyway, because I know we all want to read this book, and I have a doctor's appointment today, so I do have to go and shower and all that jazz, but let's read. Yes, I'm going to read before we get in trouble. Chapter 12. And if anyone wasn't here yesterday and didn't have a chance to catch up, so we're on chapter 12. We read chapter 11 yesterday, Grayson, which I think you caught up on already. We read 2 chapters yesterday because they were shorter. Today's chapter is pretty short too, so we'll probably do 2 today also, because this one's only 16 minutes. We usually go a little longer. One of the chapters were 45 minutes on its own, which is wild. But anyway, yesterday there was a huge storm and they got transported to another time, but we don't know for sure, but we believe Agatha Cropley, who's the woman who just passed away, was there. We think it's her. They don't know it's her, but we think it's her. And they've gone back in time. But that would mean, if that's true, that Agatha Cropley died at the age of like 350 years old. This has not been confirmed. This is all speculation currently, but I bet we're going to find out right now. So let's find out if Agatha Cropley's old as heck. Yeah, you're totally welcome, Sophie. We don't know. I'm not saying we were told that. We're just assuming it's Agatha based on context clues. Anyway, chapter 12. Here we go. Essie had, by virtue of arguing that they were newlyweds, managed to stick with Josh. He was grateful for this because so far the 17th century was proving terrifying and confusing. Mistress Agatha had confirmed the year to be 1647, which had made Essie's mouth set in a grim line. The older woman didn't seem perturbed by being asked for the date. She remarked that Mistress Winterscale often needed reminding of the date, too. So this is where my mother has been, Essie hissed as they were shown to a room in Mistress Agatha's mansion. She must have given up on Robespierre and gone after Matthew Hopkins again. Who? Josh said. The mansion wasn't quite what he'd expected, being a little larger than his own house and mostly comprised of small, oppressively dark rooms that all ran into one another. The maid that they followed past the dark carved paneling and gloomy tapestries had pockmarked skin, and she was missing teeth. Mistress Agatha had led them briskly out of the village to Brook Manor, a large building made of brick and decorative timbers. Josh had tried in vain to see which part of it might be the crumbling wall that remained in the 21st century as part of the border to a field, but given the lack of ivy growing over it and winter barley in the background, he had barely been able to place it.
His own house wouldn't even have been built yet, and that was an even stranger thought. I'll tell you in a— Oh, lovely. Is this us? Said Essie as they were shown into a room with a towering 4-poster bed. It had thick, heavy carved pillars supporting an even more carved canopy and more carving on the head and footboards. The drapes looked as if they could withstand a small siege. My mistress begs you will take fresh linen and doth sort her clothes for lending, said the maid. Well, at least Josh guessed that that's what she said. Her accent was thick and she mumbled through her rotted teeth. She bobbed a curtsy and left through another door. Essie shut it behind her and leaned it. Holy shit, she said. Josh found himself nodding vigorously. Yeah, no, exactly. He sat down on an ornately carved wooden chair that was not even remotely comfortable and said, What the F is even going on? Essie blew out a breath. My best guess would be that Lilith has come here to try to kill Matthew Hopkins, which she does when she's bored, and then she befriended Mistress Agatha here in the course of it. Mistress Agatha Hopkins, she added with a significant look at Josh. Oh, not Agatha Cropley. Okay, so I was wrong before. You can't possibly be suggesting that this woman is my ancestor, he said as Essie straightened down and went over to a window to peer out. The panes were tiny, diamond-shaped lumps of thick glass welded together with lead and gave very little view of the outside world. Hopkins is a pretty common name, Essie sighed. Yeah, no, sure, it is, she said, but also the name of one of the most prolific serial killers in English history, a man with a particular grudge against witches who happens to be a lawyer and who, oh yeah, I had a premonition about the other day when you walked into my life. You, she advanced on him, Josh Hopkins Henderson, who seem to have some resistance to the spells that are on Beldam House that make everyone else forget about it. I really don't remember it all that well, Josh began. You inherited a house with an ancient ball hanging in the window which just happened to break almost immediately, whereupon you bled all over the parchment inside it, and then you somehow forgot to send me a photo that you promised of it? He had honestly forgotten. I was busy? Essie made a sound like a game show when the contestant gets the wrong answer. I don't suppose there's the remotest chance that you have your phone on you right now. Josh felt in his pockets and then closed his eyes. No, it's in my jacket in Sienna's room. His eyes flew open. Oh my God, Sienna, do you think she's all right? She won't be born for another 350 years. Concentrate. There are too many coincidences here, Josh. The day you turned up in my life, I had a premonition of the world ending because of a lawyer who was the son of Hob. The ritual that I have done every autumn without hitch suddenly fails, and it turns out there's an ancient evil lurking beneath the earth that I have to bind with the winter, an evil that just broke free in the form of a swarm of bees or whatever that was. And you know what it said when it came after you? Josh shook his head, mutely terrified. Hopkins. Meanwhile, we end up in the heart of witch-finding country in the final year of Matthew Hopkins' reign of terror in the company of a woman who shares, both his and your name. Now I ask you again, do you really think that's a coincidence? Josh swallowed. Essie was leaning over him now and her eyes blazed green. Who is Matthew Hopkins? He breathed. He is the self-proclaimed witch-finder general, said Essie. He takes advantage of desperate, fearful, war-torn countries and torture and murders hundreds of people in the name of God. For profit. He's a mass murderer and a psychopath, and he's about 10 miles away from us right now. And you're a witch, croaked Josh. And you're his descendant, said Essie. Guys, I have to tell you, this book is not going where I thought it was going to go, but I love every second of it, but this is not what I thought was going to happen. I did not know we were going to be time traveling here today. Mistress Agatha had clothes sent to them, which proved so complex that neither Essie nor Josh could get into them without help. After the manservant had finished with Josh, the poor guy looked traumatized about it. I am so hooked into these clothes, he hissed to Essie, lifting the tabs at the base of his doublet. There were indeed hooks connecting to his breeches, which were a baggy sort of knee-length trouser over some long woolen socks. I have no idea how I'm ever going to take a leak, or He glanced around fearfully, as if the realities of Jacobean plumbing were only just dawning on him. Where I would take a leak. Oh, please, come back when your clothes contain a whalebone, said Essie. I'm wearing 400 layers here right now. The clothes looked clean enough, but they did have the faint smell of ammonia, which made Josh wrinkle his nose. Oh, God, I would not be able to handle that. Essie found it weirdly comforting, however, but she couldn't figure out why. Something in her mother's clothes must have smelled like it, but Essie had never found anything of her mother particularly comforting. The maid had offered them water to wash their faces, but seemed to think no more was required than that when Essie was covered in mud. Instead, she rubbed Essie down with a linen cloth vigorously, as if she was a horse, and then dressed her in layers of clothes that somehow failed to include any knickers at all. All this had taken place in the same bedroom where Josh was protesting his own invasion of privacy, and the two servants had seemed to find it hilarious that either of them even wanted privacy. Essie managed to convince them to draw the curtains on the bed and use that as a barrier, but the knowledge that Josh was naked behind it made her far warmer than the fire did. Their modern clothing was taken away by the mystified servants who peered in confusion at Essie's underwire bra and exclaimed out loud that the Irish were strange people indeed. Feeling somewhat draughty, she followed Josh and the dour manservant down to the lower level of the house, where more gloomy paneled rooms were traversed before they stopped in one that held Mistress Agatha. Ah, she said, looking up from her embroidery, much more suitable attire. Mistress Lilith does often arrive in the strangest railments. What manner of kinsman is she to you? Lilith? Said Essie. Well, she's my mother. Agatha laughed delightedly. Oh, she enjoys a jest also. No, truly. Sister, perhaps? Cousin? Essie exchanged a look with Josh as they took seats on hard wooden chairs. Both of them were wearing so many layers of clothes, however, that the hardness of the chair didn't really matter. She does look younger than you would expect, Josh said. Essie sighed. It was true. Witches did tend to age slowly, and Lilith, especially, had little regard for the usual progression of time. Sister, she agreed through gritted teeth. Very older, very bossy sister. Well, she is a woman who knows her mind, which I respect, said Agatha. Such women be afeard to speak their minds in these parts, and I so relish her company. But she did leave under much haste. She gave Essie an inquiring look. Yes, family emergency, said Essie, which actually is why we're here. Did Lilith ever explain a house called Beldam House? She'd been giving this some thought. If Beldam House existed in 1647, which to the best of her knowledge it did, then surely the time door did exist within it. She and Josh might have contrived a reason to get inside, but then once they did, maybe hopefully they could get back to their time. Otherwise, they were stuck here waiting for her mother to retrieve them. The possibility that she couldn't or wouldn't do that was simply not something that Essie could allow herself to even entertain. Beldam. This seemed to amuse Agatha. 'Twould be boldness indeed to name such a house in these times. Did you not hear Master Goodwin threaten to call the witch-finder? The witch-finder. Yes, that had not slipped from Essie's mind. I have heard that they did a witch-hanging in High Rodding, said Agatha, looking carefully at them in turn. That's terrible, said Josh. Aye, and no more a witch than you or I was she, said Agatha. Indeed, said Essie. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that came through the leaded panels. The fire crackled in the huge brick fireplace. Outside the room, footsteps made the floorboards creak, but none of them spoke. I do not hold with the actions of my kinsman, Agatha said eventually. He stokes fear in the town that any small evil is caused by a witch and then charges a good coin to rid them of it. In Ipswich, taxes had to be raised to pay for his villainy. For when a man is paid to find a witch he shall find, aye, and hang. Defenseless women, simple-minded men. Do you know, my house is overrun with mice because I dare not keep a cat for fear of accusation that I consort with it in the name of the devil? Yeah, Josh said beside Essie. Who would hold a conversation with a cat? No one I know. Essie kicked him from beneath her voluminous skirt. Did you say kinsman? Essie asked, and Agatha sighed. She fiddled with the metal tankard beside her and took a sip from it. "Oh, Matthew Hopkins," she said, "is my kinsman, by marriage. He hath turned all else of his family against him, and no wonder, were I not a widow of his uncle and raising his ward, I do wonder that he would send me to the gallows." His ward? Said Josh. Aye, Agatha's expression was wry. "He is a sweet child, with much none of his father's madness. His mother tied him birthing." The older woman's eyes darkened. "Hopkins said 'twas the work of a witch, and took the midwife out and beat her till she confessed to lying with the devil, when all must know the poor child was scarce old enough to be a mother. Such a man he is to blame the whole world for the ills he's made. Ye must make certain never cross paths with him, good sir and lady, for if any are touched by the devil, 'tis Hopkins himself." The fire crackled and spat. Outside there was a distant sound of horses and hooves and tack jangling. Hopkins had a son. Essie was well versed in classic literature to know that a ward was usually an illegitimate child. Hopkins had a motherless son who he had sent away to be raised by a distant relative while he raced around the place having innocent women tortured and hanged. "But we must not say so," Agatha added, shaking herself. "We must serve God in every good way. Such is fear of witches in this part that every cottage has a witch bottle buried neath the hearth or over the door." Sorry, a witch bottle? Said Josh. There were raised voices somewhere else in the house. Is that something like a witch ball? Said Essie sharply, and she leaned forward. "I'm sure, a ball, I suppose. 'Tis all the stuff and nonsense. I, time and time again, have chastised servants for such superstition. What is all that commotion out there?" She got up and had barely taken a step when the manservant in his plain doublet opened the door and said apologetically, "Aye, mistress, there be without a visitor. He claims you harbour witches." Essie's stomach clenched, which was an impressive feat given all the layers and boning and stiffened clothing restricting her. She felt Josh's hand in her hand. "Oh, stuff and nonsense," said Agatha stoutly, but the servant was already being swept aside by a man in a very fancy outfit indeed. He wore a short cloak over one shoulder, and it was trimmed and lined with fur. His doublet had a lot of decoration on it, piping and buttons and lace at the cuffs, and his boots were tall and had spurs and turnbacks on them. His hat sported a wide brim and a tall crown, and at his hip he carried a sword on a shiny leather belt. Everything he wore was black, but it was theatrical black, a fancy black, a black that wanted you to notice how expensive it was. Essie took all this in, and then she let herself look at his face. He was young, and that came as a shock. He might even have been handsome with a small beard and a mustache, except for his eyes. His eyes were blue and blazed with absolute hatred. Essie felt a buzzing in her ears, and she saw the witchfinder turn into a pustulous swarm in front of her eyes. "Essie?" Josh caught her as she fell, and she blinked up dazedly into his concerned face. "Hey, are you all right?" But she couldn't speak. Her mouth and nose were full of the stench of evil. "Hey, she can't breathe," said Josh. "Loosen her clothing. Please help me." Agatha hurried to her side and began unfastening the ties in front of Essie's bodice. Josh laid her down on the floor, which was the only flat surface around, and tugged at the lace collar around her neck. "I will not be swayed by thy presence," said the witchfinder. To Essie, his voice was the buzz of a hacksaw. "You scared her to death," snapped Josh. "Essie, hey, can you hear me?" She nodded and took in a breath. The air stank of rotten meat. Yeah, I'm all right." "The innocent have nothing to fear of me," said the witchfinder. "Such a swoon is proof of guilt." "Nay, or every woman in her bodice laced too tightly would be a witch," snapped Agatha. "Litigiousness is the work of the devil," replied the witchfinder. His face appeared above her, and Essie's hand clutched for Josh's. "See how she barely bears her flesh to try to tempt me." "I opened her clothes so she could breathe," said Josh. "Then you are her accomplice. You were right, Master Goodwin. They are a pair." "I am not an accomplice to anything," said Josh, and he seemed to attempt a smile. "Listen, I'm sure we can sort all of this out if we But the witchfinder ignored him and thundered, "Be thou a witch?" I'm not really, no, said Josh. "I say thou art. Take them from this place," he said to someone in the doorway, and booted feet sounded on the flagstones. "Good sir, I beg of you," said Agatha. "She is my kinswoman and a God-fearing soul," and Hopkins smacked her across the cheek, and both Essie and Josh sucked in a breath. Agatha rocked on her feet and said nothing. "The assizes can try 2, or they can try 3, said the witchfinder softly. "You are of use while you rear the whelp, but it does not have to be so." "Sir, they are not witches," Agatha said quietly. "Then they will be proven innocent. Come to Godwin's house. His stellars are stout." Essie wanted to fight, she really did, but the presence of Hopkins made her feel so sick that she could do very little but be led, half-dragged, from the room, with Josh's protests ringing in her ears. They were tied by the wrist to the saddle of Hopkins' horse and led through the village across the common so everyone could see them. And then they turned up a narrow sunken lane lined by trees, and Essie suddenly felt laughter bubble up inside her. "Oh, what is so funny?" said Josh. "I know where we are," said Essie, and she nodded at the tall stone building looming ahead of her. "Beldam House will always be found by those who need it." "So," said Josh, pacing up and down. "To summarize, Beldam House is currently called Godwin House, and it's owned by a man who really doesn't like us, and called in the Witchfinder General, who is my ancestor, by the way, of an illegitimate child, who is being raised by an ancestor of Agatha Cropley, who left her house to my father, who also seems to own this house." "Yeah, I think so," said Essie. "The Witchfinder has locked us in the cellar, which he sits at a banquet with his buddy in advance of taking us to Chelmsford, which is where the courts will be in session?" he queried. "Yeah, again, I do think so. Although Prudence was tried by the local magistrate," said Essie, and she knelt on the floor, her hands feeling the cracks between the stones. "Prudence? Your housemate Prudence? In the..." Josh stopped pacing as he realized, is she a time traveler too? Prudence? No. She was hanged in the mid-18th century, and though about like 100 years from now or something like that. Either way, she only decided to just stick around. Josh stared at Essie. "She's a ghost?" "Sort of. I mean, sometimes she really is quite solid. Mind you, if you walk through the woods on Gallows Lane, though," said Essie, "sometimes I come across her literally just like hanging out. I mean, I don't think anyone else has ever seen her there, but you can remember things about us, Josh. I wonder why you can remember things about us." She looked at him with a calculating expression. "I swear to God, I have no, seriously, Josh, come on. Can you feel it? Hopkins is the monster, and that thing chased us back into our own time. It's him. He's the thing that the witches bound in ice all those years ago." "Holy shit." "What?" Essie stared at her own hands. "All this time I thought we were doing a ritual to welcome in the winter and nothing more, like dancing around a maypole or something like that. And now I find out it's actually a binding ritual, only no one ever told me this, and my ancestors have done it for centuries to bind an ancient evil beneath the earth." So about this ancient evil," Josh began, but Essie wasn't finished. "Only it wasn't started by my ancestors, was it? It was started by me." She looked at him. "I bound him in ice. Me. I did it." She laughed mirthlessly. "I thought it was something that I had always had always been done since like the beginning of time. But Hopkins is the monster, and the reason I have to do it is because I've always done it." "I'm sorry. You've lost me," said Josh. "I'm the one who stops him. Don't you see? Hopkins had a really short reign of terror, and it ended in 1647, shortly before his death." "So you're gonna kill him?" said Josh. So the guy was evil. Anybody could tell that. But was she really gonna try to kill him? "I'm going to stop him," said Essie firmly. "Josh, he isn't human, not anymore. He's so full of anger and hurt that it's destroyed whatever soul he had." She knelt up and reached out to him. Josh took her hand reluctantly. "You know those people who snap and go mad and like take a pew-pew into a church? He's like that. In our era, he would be some sort of like domestic terrorist. He's wound up on hatred and rage." "Yeah, well, even I can see that," said Josh, because it was clear that the man was a sadist. "But why witches?" Essie shrugged. "I don't know. Easy target. People have hated witches for a very long time. Trust me on that one. At this point in history, we've had 100 years of religious warfare, and the bishops being burned at the stake for being the wrong kind of Christian, and now we're in a state of civil war that will result in the kind of being beheaded in a couple of years' time. And people are afraid that they're uneducated. They only know what they're told, and they're too scared to question it. And then you get someone like Hopkins, a con man with, well, really incel tendencies, who sees an opportunity for his hatred of women to be weaponized for profit. Good morning.
But why male models?
But why male models, indeed.
It took so much self-control not to say that in the middle of your thing.
It was a good little monologue on her behalf, though, right?
Yeah.
Josh gazed at the dark, dank walls of the cellar. They'd been left one candle, and a small light came through the high windows as the sun began to set. Well, I guess, yeah, 400 years and nothing really changes, he muttered. Okay, so how do we stop him? We don't. I do, said Essie. Her face was determined. Her hair was long and had since fallen out of the style that Agatha's maid had put it into, and the lace collar that had covered her low neckline had been left behind. Her bosom, there was no other word for it, heaved. Maybe it was the impending danger, but Josh had never wanted a woman more than this in his life. Well, how are you going to do that? He managed, and Essie smiled. Remember how I said most witches have a specialty? Josh nodded, and suddenly noticed his hands were becoming very cold, very cold, very quickly. Gasping, he pulled them back and shoved them under his arms. Essie looked smug. Now imagine what I can do to Hopkins if I could do that to you. They decided to wait until the house had settled down for the night, which wasn't really hard to determine because the house creaked with every footstep. Doors slammed and voices called out, and frequently a light showed under the edge of the cellar door, and someone came down to listen at it. All they had to do was wait until all activity ceased. Essie had heard that Hopkins employed sleep deprivation on his victims, also that he liked to find a devil's mark and prick it with a pin to see if the person felt pain or not. Since she was covered in freckles, she really wasn't looking forward to this. Best to head it off at the pass. She had never used her powers to hurt anyone before, at least not on purpose. But Hopkins was a monster, and he really had to be stopped. She told herself that, and honestly, she almost believed it. Beside her, Josh suddenly laughed. What? He looked down at his woolen stockings and baggy breeches. Go to England, they said. See the historic sights, they said. Yeah, well, I'm certainly seeing them now. Essie smiled. Yeah, it's a highly immersive experience. I really don't recommend the hospitality, though. No, or the catering. There wasn't a lot of light now. The summer sun eventually set, and their candle was guttering out. Essie leaned against Josh in the gloom. Why did you come to England anyway? She said. 'Cause I inherited a house. Yeah, but you could have sold it or rented it out. You didn't have to live in it. Josh sighed. You know what, there just wasn't a lot for me in Seattle anymore. Oh? It was a leading question. She quite expected to be told to mind her own business, but Josh was silent for a long while. Eventually he said, I told you who my father was back in the storm. You asked his name. Hopkins. Yeah, Edward Mason Hopkins. Essie shrugged. The name did ring a very vague bell, but she didn't know from where. You really don't know who he was? Should I? Josh's shoe scraped on the ground as he shifted his weight restlessly. Well, when he died, he said, he was the 43rd richest man in America. Essie turned towards the pale shape of his face. Seriously? Yeah, seriously. The bulk of it's going to Siena, mostly in assets, with hefty bequests for his second and third wives, a couple of cousins, and various friends. Essie didn't know how much the wealth of the 43rd richest man in America might be, but she suspected it was an eye-watering amount. And yet, Josh barely had been able to afford a new roof until Sienna moved in. Her curiosity itched like a rash. Yeah, my mother got nothing. I used to be angry about that, too. Used to? Josh sighed. Well, my parents met in college. She was the daughter of a blue-collar worker and scraped up herself by her bootstraps. He inherited wealth and enjoyed slumming it. I guess opposites do attract. At least for long enough for them to get blue-collar worker and scraped up herself by her bootstraps. He inherited wealth and enjoyed slumming it. I guess opposites do attract. At least for long enough for them to get married and have a kid. And then... Sorry, someone popped up a thing and I lost my spot. And then probably sometime around the rent being due and the baby teething, he got tired of slumming it and went back to the warm, loving bosom of his billionaire family. Leaving you and your mother to fend for yourselves. Josh's fingers plucked at the lace on her sleeve. Yeah, that's what I always believed. My mother loved to tell me how my father's family had tried to pay her off, but she said no because money isn't everything. She told me that so many times that I almost actually believed it. She said she didn't need his money, which left me with the impression that he never offered any. An impression that was proven wrong, Essie guessed. You know when you're a kid and you just accept whatever your parents say and only much later on you realize that some stuff really doesn't add up? Essie looked around the dank cellar as it sank into darkness. Speaking as someone whose mother spent most of her time in a different century, she said dryly, please tell me more about that. Right, I guess, sure, yeah. What did your mother lie to you about? Josh made a sound that was almost a laugh. Do all parents lie? Seems like it. Josh said, I put myself through law school, scholarships, second and third jobs, ramen noodles for dinner. It was hard. I spent all my time resenting my father who could have easily paid for it all. And my mom always said, look at what you've achieved all by yourself. You don't need him. Until she got sick. And then I did need him. Essie, who had grown up with the NHS on hand if she ever needed it, said, oh, medical bills? You have no idea. The numbers were terrifying, even with insurance. She'd be in debt for the rest of her life, assuming she even lived long enough for that. And she was my mom, you know? I couldn't let her just... Essie squeezed his arm. She could write the book on difficult mothers, but she understood nonetheless. Yeah, I know, she said. So I did the only thing I could think of, and I had an address for him, you know? He reached out when I graduated high school and offered to buy me a car. I said no, being the proud idiot I was at the time, but he left an address in case I ever needed anything. So I got in my car, which was cheap and crappy, as was my apartment, and I drove to from Seattle to LA. And oh, did I tell you at this point that I had no idea Sienna even existed? Really? No, I refused to learn anything about my father as like a point of pride. So when I buzzed into the compound and drove up to the front door, this teenage girl came out and said, Daddy never told me that he had a son. And we were both pretty flabbergasted about that. Wow. Yeah. His fingers brushed her arm. I thought I'd be angrier, to be honest, but Sienna was just like one of those people. It's kind of hard to dislike her, you know? She went to bat for me against her father, our father, and said that he should give me some money. And he said, well, son, I tried. He did? Josh sighed. I didn't believe it until I confronted my mother, who was mad as hell that I'd even gone to visit him. She said that he'd been trying to buy her off for years. He'd been sending her child maintenance payments, large sums, and checks for my birthday, Christmas. She said it was guilt money, and she sent it back. And I remember looking around her kitchen where the cabinet doors were coming off and the linoleum was cracked and there was water stains on the ceiling and thinking, how could you be so selfish? The light had almost completely gone now. Essie had excellent night vision, but nobody could see in total darkness. I worked myself to the bone getting through college. I nearly burned out several times. I used to lie awake and worry about not being able to afford my textbooks. And all this time, she was turning down money. She was choosing to be poor. And like, I guess I get it, kind of, because I really don't like Sienna paying for everything in my house. But come on, it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. To spite your face, too, said Essie quietly. Yeah. Josh cleared his throat. She was so angry about me letting him pay off her medical bills that we barely spoke for a year. We haven't really been close since. The trust's gone, I guess, he said very simply, but Essie heard the ache underneath it. Josh, the kind, smiling man who made silly jokes and accepted insane facts like time travel and was also a really good kisser, was still in pain from an argument with his mother how many years ago? A decade if Sienna had been a teenager back then. I'm sorry, she said, leaning into him. I know, I don't have the monopoly on weird relationships with my mother, Josh began. Hey, no, don't apologize. It's still shitty. After a moment, his arm came around her shoulders and he gave her a brief hug. Thanks. It felt good to be held by Josh, a different kind of good from the kissing they'd done earlier. There was a trust here and a companionship and an understanding and, of course, a red-hot lust that was something she was keeping in mind for later. Maybe, she thought, maybe if it's a red-hot enough, it'll thaw me out. She cleared her throat. So, is that why you came here then? So, for a fresh start? Yeah, well, kinda. I mean, that was years ago, of course. I threw myself into my career, climbed the corporate ladder, made a lot of money for a tech firm who liked my ability to find legal loopholes wherever they screwed someone over. It was soul-destroying work, Essie, seriously, he sighed. And you spend your time with enough soul-destroying people, he hesitated, like Maya. Maya? But he was prevented from saying any more by the sound of footsteps coming down the stairs toward the cellar. One last victory taunt before he retires to sleep on a bed of money, Essie muttered, bracing herself, and Josh squeezed her shoulders. The sudden light of the lantern was dazzling after the darkness. Behold their licentiousness, declared Hopkins. We were hugging, said Essie. Ha! Is that what you call it? And didn't we mention we were married? Essie could think about the warmth that thought gave her later. Fornication, thundered Hopkins, and he stank, but Essie could distinguish it now. It wasn't a physical stench, it was the foulness of a rotten soul. Who are you to prove this to? Essie said, because there was no one even there with Hopkins. Do you hear voices? Josh said sympathetically, and Essie had to hide a smile. Silence! The devil has taken you, spat Hopkins. His eyes glowed with madness. I will root him out. Dude, we do not know any devil, said Essie. No, we really don't, said Josh. He hath touched you, said Hopkins, his eyes darting to the left. There be a witch's mark on you where he hath suckled. Ew, said Essie. Oh, God, nobody is suckling anybody, said Josh. Not without proper consent, anyway, Essie added, and maybe the devil did make her say that. Josh barked out a laugh. You think this is jest. You will not find it so when you are hanging from a rope, Hopkins threatened. They all cry and repent, even you will. Once more, Essie had the feeling that he was talking to someone else. She craned into the darkness beyond the flickering lantern. We've got nothing to repent of, she said calmly. In an hour or so, she would bind him with her magic. He was younger here, weaker here. He hadn't spent 400 years festering in his own madness yet. The thought occurred to her that she'd still have to deal with it when she got home, but that could wait. Here and now was all that really mattered. Thou liest! The devil lies with thy tongue, muttered Hopkins, and his eyes darted again. Again, no one lies with any part of me without consent, said Essie. Master Hopkins, who are you talking to? What? Is there someone else in here? 'Tis a distraction, shouted Hopkins. Spittle fleckled around his mouth. A lie! The devil is in you. He really isn't, said Essie wearily. We're going to need proof of that, said Josh. I shall prick thee in front of witnesses, said Hopkins. The innuendos just make themselves, don't they? Said Essie, and she could swear she heard a faint giggle. Whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty, said Josh. The writ of habeas corpus, the right to a fair trial? I don't think they have a Bill of Rights here, said Essie. Right, the Magna Carta then? Said Josh. Did we mention he's a lawyer too? Said Essie. Not that it would do the slightest bit of good against Hopkins in his foam-flecked rage, but it was fun to wind him up just the same. I will see you dance the Tyburn jig, spat Hopkins. I am the witch-finder general, and I will see thee hang. With that dramatic statement, he swept out of the room, and they heard the key turn in the lock. Essie peered into the darkness, willing her eyes to adjust, but before she could make anything out, Josh just started laughing. Holy shit, he said. Essie, my God, you're magnificent. I could kiss you. And Essie said yes before she even thought about it. And then he kissed her. His hands cupped her cheeks and guided her to him in the darkness, and his mouth found hers in a kiss that was coming thrillingly familiar. She moved closer to him and at the same time was cursing all the layers between them, delighting in the sensation of his doublet against her exposed bosom. She was tired and she was filthy and she was scared, but Josh was kissing her, and so there was still some hope in the world. A sound of a giggle had her whipping her head around. Hey, is someone there? She said. What? Mumbled Josh, and his hands gripped her bare shoulder. Canst thou hear me? Said a small voice. Yeah, I can, said Essie, reluctantly drawing away from Josh and his wonderful kisses. Wait. Who is that? Said Josh. You can hear it too? Very faintly. You think someone's there? It appeared as a glimmer, as if the light reflected off something that wasn't even there, the very faintest suggestion of a white arm and a face, and the merest idea of the wisp of a hair. Few can hear me, said the voice. Is Hopkins one of them? Said Essie, and the giggle came again. Oh, he pretends he can't, that I'm sent by the devil to torment him. Are you? Said Josh fearfully, and his hand found Essie's in the darkness. It went by way of her nearly exposed breast, but she didn't mind that. Nay, I am sent by Hopkins. He sent you by himself to torment himself? The voice made a noise that was the equivalent of a verbal shrug. 'Twas him slew me, 'tis him tormented. Into the silence that followed, Essie said, Hopkins killed you? Aye, he does not like it when you laugh at him or tell him no. Essie closed her eyes. A picture was being painted. So he killed you because you turned him down? The glimmer of light bobbed and flickered. Heads do not like it when they strike stone, it whispered. 'Tis red and bloodsome. He said next day he had not seen me. He said 'twas villainy. Witches, he said. But 'twas him. Essie turned to look at Josh, even though she couldn't see him. And you've been haunting him ever since? I suppose I have. So Hopkins had killed a girl who laughed at him and turned him down, and he'd gone on killing. So much for incels being a modern problem. And he can see you? Said Josh, his hands gripping Essie's. He hears me. I know not if he sees me. Do you see me? Yeah, we see you, said Essie softly. What's your name? Asked Josh. The ghost appeared to have to think about it. Mary, she said eventually. How long have you been like this? Oh, I know not. The light flickered again. I was young. I thought I would move on. They said I would go to heaven. Oh, I'm sorry, said Essie. And I am dragged around with him. Am I real, or am I just his memory of me? Asked the ghost suddenly. I don't know. She didn't look or sound like Prudence, but then Prudence had been a witch. Essie hadn't encountered many other ghosts, and most of the ones she could recall were just faint, drifting echoes. Mary? Can you tell us if anyone is still awake in the house? The light bobbed around. I could. I can. Why? Essie took a deep breath and then let it out. She honestly didn't know if what she said next was true or even possible. Well, because I'm going to bind Matthew Hopkins so that he can't hurt anyone else, she said, and I'm going to set you free. The light bobbed closer. Truly? I swear, said Essie. Mary giggled again and flew away, and the faint light disappeared through the door. Can you really do that? Muttered Josh. I don't know. Let's hope so, said Essie, who had no idea. Surely, if Mary was tied to Hopkins and she bound Hopkins, or even maybe killed him, could she do that? Should she do that? The light flowed back into the room. They all do sleep, but the fornicators in the attic, she reported. I did not know two men could do that, mused the ghost. Into the following silence, Essie said, Is either one of those men Hopkins? Nay, he be sleeping. Essie took a deep breath and let it out. Right, she said. Okay then, stand back, or float back. Josh, I might need you ready to catch the door, but cover your hands. Why? Because I'm gonna freeze it. She heard rather than saw him unbutton and remove his doublet and concentrated her will. The door, a plain rectangle of planks nailed together, was cool and slightly damp under her hands. Damp was good. All right, she said, and then willed it to freeze. After a moment, Josh said, Should something be happening? It is happening, Essie said, and the wood grew cold as stone under her palms. Such as, just be ready. It was cold as ice now. The hinges began to crack. For what? Will you just shut up? I'm trying to concentrate. All the moisture in the wood began to evaporate as the temperature rushed past freezing. Frost rippled over it. The planks contracted and the hinges snapped. The door was shrinking. Cover your hands, Essie whispered, and be ready. The door wobbled and collapsed in a heat of wood and metal shards. The faint light slipped in from the stairwell beyond, and Essie winced at the noise. Josh stood with his hands wrapped in his doublet, arms outstretched, waiting. I was ready, he said. Fuck, it's cold in here. She put her finger to her lips, and Josh silently slipped back into his doublet, and Essie picked up a piece of frozen wood. She inched forward. There be a man, whispered Mary, and Essie raised the piece of wood. A pair of feet came down the stairs. She swung at them, and when he fell, she grabbed him and pressed her hands to his mouth. I'm sorry, she whispered, and his skin turned faintly blue with cold. He was just doing his job. I'm sorry. The man slithered to the ground and laid still. Essie stared for an awful moment as she saw his chest rise and fall. The door wobbled and collapsed into a heap. Oh, wait, I just read that. And then she turned back to Josh and said, Come on. Is he dead? Asked Josh. Unconscious, whatever, he'll be fine. She held out her hand and Josh hesitated before taking it. I won't hurt you, she said impatiently, and then she very much hoped that that was true. Right, He swallowed and took her hand, and Essie led the way with her frozen club in one hand. The cellar steps opened up into the kitchen, a vast stone-built space that barely resembled the one that Essie was familiar with. She stilled at the sight of people sleeping on straw mattresses near a huge fireplace which glowed with a faint heat. She and Josh crept as silently as possible across the flagstone to the door. The wispy light of Mary was almost invisible behind them. The layout of the house was entirely different. The kitchen door gave onto a stone walkway bordering a small courtyard that Essie wasn't familiar with. They had initially been brought straight to the kitchen and then down into the cellar, she had to think. Essie, what the F? Whispered Josh as she opened her eyes to see the courtyard changing. A staircase appeared to the far side of it, as if it had always been there. Well, the house does change with our needs, she breathed. Those steps, Josh began as he clutched her tightly. They're where we need to go then. She pulled him across the courtyard to the steps, and they began outside and ended inside, with no actual entrance along the way. When Essie glanced back at the bottom of the stairs, it was in a large, almost familiar hallway with a fireplace. The time travel I could deal with, Josh whispered, but this stuff is freaking me out. He be this way, announced Mary, drifting through the antechamber, and Essie knew that she was extremely right. She knew where Hopkins was, and she knew what she had to do. She glanced the other way towards the door that pulled her attention. Yes, the Godwin girl had power, all right. Should she ask for help? No, there was no sense in that. There was too much risk whether the girl helped her or not, and Essie didn't want to change the course of history. She just wanted to go home. She glanced the other way to where she could feel Lilith's door calling her. Feel? It says fell, but I assume she means feel. Best to not let anyone know that she was there. All right, she said. Let's do this. Dun, dun, dun! Well, that was a wild ride, if ever there was one. My goodness. My goodness indeed. Crazy. You're crazy, girl. I know, that's how I feel as well. But we got some good info though, right? I know, me too, Jen. I'm into it. Yeah, too, Naisa. It's totally different than anything we expected, but really cool. And I hope the whole rest of the series is equally as tantalizing, if you will. It's interesting. It's definitely an interesting, yeah, I'm definitely a fan. I think we picked good. You know, when we were going through all those books, there were a lot that sounded like they would be fun, but I think we definitely, you know, hit the jackpot with this. So that's fun, very fun. And I like that there's this whole like old-timey witch hunter through line. Yeah, no, perfect. I'm interested. I wonder if there will be more time travel of different kinds in the future books. We have no idea. Obviously, there's no way for us to know, but it is cool. All right, so I gotta scooch because I gotta eat something and shower and go to the doctor. But I will be back on later to make slime. We need to make like ruby slippers, the scarecrow, and a couple others. So I'll be on to do some of that this evening. A lot of orders are going out today already. People who ordered Halloween slime flights are going out, blah, 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 blah. So all of that is great, and I will see you all later, and I hope you have a great day until then. Bye, guys.